Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Road to 18-inch Arms, episode number 4 this time. So, after a bit of a holiday break, and a break from preacher curls too, it had been a couple weeks, it was nice to get back to them, feeling pretty much healed up, so that's obviously a very good thing for my mental health to be able to do preacher curls, the highlight of my day. In all seriousness, it was nice to be back to preachers. Performance is down just a hair on a couple sets, but nothing worth being concerned about. It's more just a little bit of that rust coming off. So either way, first set still 8 reps, just on track as I was before. So couple quick common questions that I've gotten on pretty much every episode of the series, all 3 episodes at least. The first one is, why don't you use back support on overhead extensions? Wouldn't that be better? So, 1, yes, it would be better, and 2, the reason why I don't use it is because I don't have a short back, just seated, stationary bench for the home gym. So, I have to just kind of straddle my flat bench and use it from there. So, for myself, one of the biggest things with overhead extensions is I do need a mirror to be able to look at my elbows in the mirror. Since the movement is happening behind my head, I have such a hard time gauging where my arms are actually at. So the mirror is going to be key. I had another couple people also suggest just going backwards on the preacher curl, which I actually have used before and it works really well, but I don't have a mirror behind me. But luckily that is going to be something I'm installing relatively soon. I finally got the camera. The lighting is set up too, as you'll see later in this video. It looks a little bit sharper than my $24 Amazon LED lights that I've had for 2 years. Just a little bit better, but basically with that, once I get the mirror installed, I will be using the reverse preacher bench to be doing my overhead extensions. It'll be much better, much more stable. I can get my elbows into the position that they want to be rather than the position they're kind of forced into based on me trying to balance the weight, especially as I get heavier on an isolation. Throws everything off a little bit. So next question, quick one here. Do you count the bar with your Smith machine? So for my home gym, I do count the bar because my Smith machine in the home gym does not have counterweights. People keep telling me that I'm not lifting as much as I say I am because the Smith bar weighs nothing. In my home gym, it's a unique situation where the counterweights do not fit in the Smith machine because if you look at the video, you probably can't see it in these since they're angled down, but my Smith machine is actually up in the rafters of my basement ceiling since I have a short ceiling, but I somehow got a commercial grade Smith machine down there. Basically, I am unable to put the counterweights in because the pulley that they go on will go basically into the floor of my upstairs. So no counterweights. The bar is, I assume it's 45. It might be a little bit heavier, might be 50 or 55 with some of the added hooks and stuff on the actual bar. But either way, I just count it as 45. At the least, it is 45 pounds. So this is accurate. In the actual commercial gym, I'll usually track it plates per side. So if I'm doing one plate, a 25 and a 5, I would do 1P plus 30. Very easy to log and very straightforward. You don't have to try and figure out if it's a 5, 10, 15, 20 pound bar and whatnot. Just a nightmare, so I avoid that at all costs. Next question, do you still use the rep goal system? I do not use the rep goal system. I've become a little bit more surgical with my training as I've become more advanced, and I no longer have a tendency to sandbag my sets. With the rep goal system, it encourages you to push closer to failure on all of your sets, and that's something that I don't really need to cue myself for at this point in my training. For a lot of beginners or recovering powerlifters, I do think it's a great tool to make sure you are able to really push hard on your first set and not sandbag to get better performance on your final set compared to something like a static rep range. So it's very useful, but I just use another version of dynamic double progression. Basically what I'll do is, say I have 2 sets on a lift, I'll pick a range and then just work within that range. Once my first set hits my rep goal or surpasses it, then I'll increase my weight by about 5 to maybe 7.5%, but usually about 5% for that next session, especially as I do become a little bit stronger. Those percentages just go down a little bit. Next question. This one is a unique one. It's kind of a longer one, so I actually screenshotted it. I didn't feel like writing it down and trying to copy the whole thing. So this is a comment from, or a question from Clay Bowman on the last video. I'm having this experience right now. I put 15 pounds on my strict easy curls for 6 to 10, 7 on my towel curls, 25 on my skull crushers, 10 on my dumbbell French press, 20 pounds on my easy bar French press in the last 4 months. I put an entire inch on my forearms. I just started training them, but haven't seen a lick of upper arm growth, still at 16 inches. Does this mean I've just gotten better at cheating? I don't think that's the case. I wish I had filmed my lifting. So let's break this down real quick, and I'm going to try and make this as precise as I possibly can without rambling and without giving you confusing advice. So I'll try and keep it simple and efficient. With this, you stated that you added an inch to your forearms and that your upper arms haven't grown. They're still at 16 inches. So with your forearms, you mentioned you just started training them, so you made noob gains. An inch is definitely a little bit more than noob gains, especially if you just started training them. That's quite a bit. If your upper arms are still at 16, let's look at the number 16. So assuming you're an average person with average genetics and you're within a reasonable body fat percentage, anywhere from, say, 12 to 20% roughly, that's not a beginner arm. You're not going to be making noob gains, and you're not going to be growing your arms just through training in most cases. There are definitely some people that can respond to arm training better than others, and that's totally fine. But I think for the vast majority of people, maybe comparable to myself, you need very serious arm isolation to actually get them to grow, which is very evident through my training history. So with a 16-inch arm, they're not going to grow by accident. So the first issue here could be, it could be body weight. Are you maintaining your body weight? If you are maintaining your body weight, you could be recomping, so you could just be getting leaner, and your arms are actually just staying the same size, which means they're growing muscle since fat is being removed from the area in the recomp. Very straightforward answer. I'm going to assume that probably isn't the case. Let's dive into the training a little bit more. So you mentioned all of your lifts for arms are done with free weights. One issue that I've found with myself and training some people that have gotten to the 17-inch mark, with this, it's better to sometimes switch to more stable lifts. And this is the point where it really does become useful because your lifts are getting heavy relative to your body weight. So let's say you're a beginner and you're 165 pounds and you're doing a barbell curl with 35 or 40 pounds. That curl is a very small percentage of your body weight. So when the bar goes halfway up and it's about a foot and a half in front of you, your weight can offset that pretty well. Let's say you're an intermediate and you have 16-inch arms and you're barbell curling, say, 100 pounds and you weigh 180. Now that bar is about half of your body weight, actually over half of your body weight. So to explain this in simple terms, when the weight gets that heavy relative to your body weight, it's going to offset your balance, and your body's going to have to work in other ways to counter that balance. Other muscles are going to have to work to shift your body into the right position. You can even put a pretty simple example here, let's say with the front delts. If the bar is halfway up or 2/3 the way up in that curl, the bar wants to push back closer to your center of mass, so that's trying to push your elbows back, your shoulders, your upper chest even a little bit has to work to keep the bar forwards. Your back's going to want to tilt back, your hips are going to want to get under the bar to get that bar as close to your center as you possibly can. And the same concept applies in a similar way to other free weight lifts for your arms, especially for arms because it's an isolation lift. It's not a compound lift where most compound lifts stay directly over your center of mass, and that's what allows you to progress so long on something like a compound lift compared to certain isolation. So moving to something that is more stable, where you don't have to worry about your balance and your coordination as much, can actually make a pretty big difference in your overall force output. And that's why when I got from 16 and a half inch arms to 17 and a half, you're seeing the lifts I'm using are all supported and they're all stable with a couple different exceptions here. But that's why you see me using preacher curls for my bicep training for the majority of it. That's why you're seeing Smith machine JM presses for my triceps, because it's another lift where, one, it's a Smith so I don't have to balance it, but two, the bar can stay over my center of mass and I get a great range of motion on my triceps. So these are all things that can help. A lot of free weight lifts in isolation fashion might not necessarily be as lengthened biased too. So I did find that having a lengthened biased technique or lift was a pretty big difference maker for my arm growth. So having something like a Smith JM press where I have peak resistance in a spot where my tricep never gets peak resistance in that fully stretched position, compared to something like a skull crusher where it's usually peak resistance in the mid-range, did do a pretty significant amount for actually growing my arms from that 16 or so size all the way up to 17 and a half. So it made a pretty big difference. So overall, Stable lifts that are lengthened biased, are things that helped me the most. It wasn't pumping up the volume a whole ton. It wasn't rotating variations all the time and trying to shock my muscle with all these intensity techniques. It was as simple as pick stable lifts that are lengthened biased and go extremely, extremely hard on those lifts. And one last thing, strength doesn't always equal size. If the lift just isn't quite potent enough to give you growth, even if you get stronger at it, it might just not give you the growth that you're looking for. One more question, similar topic. Why do you do cheated negatives or partials after failure on single arm cable curls? Very simple reason for this. It's a short and biased lift where the peak resistance is at the top in the most contracted position. That's also where the bicep is generally going to be weakest, so being able to do partial or negatives after this just gets me a little bit more stimulus.